Well, good afternoon. Congratulations on making it to the last session. Yay, great job. So our task and topic for today is to deal with these pesky ape men. So we're going to look at some of these interesting fossils. So my story about these fossils, in a nutshell, is something like this. I went from evolution to creation by studying the resources that we have here. I read a book by the ICR founder, Dr. Henry Morris, and I read this back in the 90s. That's the 1990s. And when I read the book, it was like a whole new world opened up to me, and I thought, well, there's not a lot of science to back up evolution. So I was persuaded after reading this perspective and this evidence in the real world that supported Scripture, I was persuaded that, you know what, my belief in evolution just doesn't stand on scientific footing. And so that drew me to creation. Then I went back to the Scripture, read Genesis again, and I thought, this got it right. And there's lots of observations that back it up. And so anyway, I came to creation. And that, by the way, that transformed my whole view of God, who now is more trustworthy because he left me a record that is a trustworthy record of where I came from. So I studied a little bit of this and a little bit of that subject, and I answered all my own personal questions except the ape-man question. And I was just pretty baffled by it all because there's the this Ithacus and the that Ithacus and all these words and all these names and all these fossils and all these hominids and what even is that? And it was just overwhelming. But I needed to find the truth. I needed to find some answers. So I buckled down and started to read and research. And what I found was several trends. So I'm going to share with you at least one, maybe two trends that I found in my researches over the years on this topic. So one of those trends, I'll just lay it right out, is the three categories. I found this trend. All the fossils that I looked at, whatever its name is, fit into one of three categories. And none of those categories turned out to be evolutionary ancestor or even evolutionarily friendly. They all turned out to be friendly to the Genesis position. And so we're going to look at just a few examples that illustrate these three categories. Who's ready to learn my cute little three categories today? Okay, yay, half of us. The other half? Come on, get ready. This is an important deal because if we came from apes, then verses like this, which form the foundation for understanding the gospel, lose their credibility. And we have a culture that's surrounding us that says, there's no Adam. We didn't came from Adam. We came from apes, not Adam. And so when we get to verses like this, and so it is written, the first man, Adam, became a living being. By the way, he's quoting from Genesis as though it's actual history, is Paul. And then he says, the last Adam. Well, who's that, class? That's the Lord Jesus. He became a life-giving spirit. Well, if there was no first Adam, what does that say about the last Adam? So he's making a parallel between two actual people. And so if there was no actual first person, then that undermines the credibility of the last person, which I think is what this whole topic, the way it's presented by the secular position, I think that's what it's all about, is undermining our understanding or the logic behind the gospel. So to restore that logic, we have to know something about, I think it would help if we knew something about the trends that we can find in these fossils. So we're going to look at 4 examples in the next 30 minutes or less. And these are the examples. We'll look at Ida first, then Lucy, then Homo habilis, Neanderthal. The Germans pronounce it with a hard T, like my last name, Thomas, so Neanderthal. And then modern man. We won't look at modern man because you look at that in the mirror, so you're good to go on that. Okay, so 4 examples. Each one of them are going to illustrate one of the 3 categories that all these fit into. And as we go, I'm going to show these little icons. Here's an icon of a golf ball on a golf tee. And I'm going to grab my golf tee, imagine it here. I'm going to push it in the ground in my imagination, and I'm going to say, let's, and then when I do this, we all together say, tee it up. It's going to go like this. Let's tee it up. And at that point, I'm going to explain to you what the evolutionary news media said about a particular fossil when it first came out. Does that make sense? Okay, and then you'll see this icon. Then we'll talk about what the science shows. And then we're going to take our imaginary golf club, and I'm going to swing it, and I'm going to say, let's, and then we all together say, knock it out, kind of like this. Let's knock it out. So at that point, we're going to let them, the evolutionists themselves, knock their own evidence out. And so that's all we're going to do today for the next 4 examples, starting with Ida. So here's Ida, and we're going to, let's tee it up. Here's Ida. Here's what they said about Ida in the spring of 2009. Extraordinary find is missing link. It is the missing link. Wow, we've been looking for this for so long, and now we finally have the missing link. And there's a picture of the fossil Ida. This little creature is going to show us our connection with all the rest of the mammals, said Sir David Attenborough, who speaks with a British accent. And how could he possibly be wrong? The guy who stands to gain fame, funding, and fortune, Huram, he's the one who found it and is promoting it and put it together for a National Geographic special television episode before it was even peer-reviewed by the scientists. He said this will be the one pictured in the textbook for the next 100 years. By the way, it's not in the textbooks today, and there's a good reason for that, as we'll look at. So, cooler heads looked at the same fossil, Ida, and there are the legs, peculiar-looking legs in this creature, and it turns out that they match peculiar-looking legs in a creature that you can go see in the Dallas Zoo right now. Any guesses on that creature? It leaps. It's a lemur. Oh, it's a lemur. You know what? It's a dead lemur, so it's no missing link. All right, so in the fall of that same year, headlines came out. I would call them low lines. No National Geographic episode special came out saying, we were wrong. Nope. But everyone watched the episodes saying, this is our new missing link. But the debunking of the missing link happened in the labs. And a few scientists recognized, look, these are lemurs. And a lemur died. So because a lemur died, does that mean I have to go back to my Bible and go, well, a lemur died, so therefore Adam's not real. Let me erase that from the book. Not at all. It's just a dead lemur. Okay, no threat at all. In fact, in a way, it confirms what Genesis said all along, repeating 10 times in just the first chapter, that these creatures are supposed to reproduce according to their kinds, which means lemurs would always have been lemurs and always will be lemurs. And that's what this actually illustrates, the faithfulness according to kinds. By the way, the broad picture of evolution attacks that biblical statement head on by asserting that creatures morph between kinds. But the scripture is adamant, according to kinds, reproduce, faithful to the kind. So anyway, that's Ida, and it illustrates our first category. So we're going to let them, and let's knock it out. So we're going to knock it out. They knocked it out. You don't have to get a Ph.D. in paleoanthropology to see how to knock this one off the tee. Hey, that rhymes quite cleverly. Yeah, all you have to do is let the words of the hostile witness. So here's the guy Huram. He stands to gain fame, funding, and fortune, but his colleagues are actually his enemies. And they want the glory for themselves. They want funding for themselves. And so there's a little bit of personal rivalry going on here. And they're saying, it's just a dead lemur. And he's saying, it's a missing link. No, it isn't. So we have this controversy going on with not just Ida, but as we'll see, every single offered potential candidate for human ancestry. Bone-crunching debunks. It's debunked. It was just hype, you see. And so that illustrates our first category, which we're going to call animal. Category 1, animal. Say animal. All right, it's a dead animal. Does that threaten Genesis or our history in Adam? Nope. In fact, death is an intrusion into what was originally very good. The origin of death is actually found in Genesis chapter 3. And so the Bible says you should see design, and it should be crumbling apart. And we have creatures that die. And so death is an intruder that will be erased one day. by the action of the Lord Jesus Christ, the Creator and Redeemer. So that's what we're looking forward to. And so far, the Bible stands tall. What about Lucy? Let's look at Lucy. Sixth grade public school textbooks in California show Lucy on the left, Homo habilis in the middle, and Homo sapiens on the right. It goes from sort of small to medium to large, and it goes from really slopey forehead to kind of slopey forehead to kind of straight up and down forehead. And so students are supposed to look at this and get the impression that evolution has happened. We came from apes, starting with Australopithecus, if you want to say that. So few of you want to say that. Anyway, let's just call it Lucy if you want to go that way. So we get to, hey, pay attention. Let's tee it up. Here's what they said in 1974 when it was published in National Geographic. Lucy had a lumbar curve, and that's significant because modern apes, like gorillas and chimpanzees, they don't have the S-shaped back that humans have. They have a C-shaped back. So they don't have the lumbar or the lower back curve. They just have a straight back. By the way, that gives them stability and rigidity from which they can do what in the trees? Swing from tree branches. So it gives them stiff support for that. Okay, human-like pelvis is what was claimed, and then human-like knee and human-like foot. So man, this thing is like partly ape, partly human. It must be the missing link. Okay, so to look at the anatomy differences between humans and apes, these scientists recently put together a structure, and they mapped different body parts when chimps walk, and they put the same markers to make digital maps on chimps and humans. And what they found is, see there's some differences when we walk as opposed to when chimps walk. And the chimp walks with a stiff back, and actually it's okay, so here's human. And so there's your pelvis, is this pelvic girdle down here. Your shoulder girdle is above. But we have an S-shaped back, and we have a flexible lower spine. So that when we take a left foot forward, for example, our right shoulder comes forward. And it's kind of like loading up a spring with every step. Load, release, load, release. And so that's why humans can run marathons and no animal can. In contrast, chimpanzees, look at this. When they walk, left leg forward, left shoulder forward, because they don't have the flexibility in their spine. So they kind of walk like this, which is fun to do. And if we had space, I'd have us all walking like that. It's fun. Actually, let's do that. Let's do something at least. Okay, so we're going to demonstrate our humanity by, let's just do this real quick. It'll take a second. If you'll stand in place in front of your seat and then just follow my instructions. Yep. You're going to stand and demonstrate your humanity. Now, you have to do it like this. You have to have your feet aimed forward, knees aimed forward. Remember, chimps are like this, so don't be chimpy. Just knees forward like a person. And then all you have to do is just quickly greet the person behind you without moving your feet. Hello. Go ahead. Whoa, you can twist it, baby. Twist and shout. That's it. Okay, how would you do it if you were a chimp? Make your back stiff, put your knees out, now greet the person behind you. How would you do it? You can't move your back, you can't twist your back. What are you going to do? You got to hop. Yep. Back row, you're not participating. Just say hi to the back wall. It's responsive. It echoes. Okay, sit down. Good job. Excellent work, everybody. Well done. So now we get to look at Lucy for real. Okay, the claim was made that Lucy's lumbar back was S-curved and flexible. And look what's not even there. The bones. Now, this is some of the worst science. It's not even science, because at the most fundamental level, science is supposed to be about that which is observable. The best science is observable and repeatable. This is neither. There's nothing there to see. It's just storytelling in a place where there's no evidence. And so, anyway, so that's the claim. The claim is based on no data. Okay, so the knee is a human-like knee. Well, I wonder why. Found 200 feet deeper and hundreds of feet further away from the rest of the skeletal elements that were all assembled together into this original Lucy. Okay, what about the inner ear? So apes, this is pretty cool. This may be worth the price of admission. Okay, so for humans, we have a big hole in the bottom of our head that integrates with our spine. Okay, it's called the foramen magnum, which is Latin for big hole. It's in the bottom. Okay, but for apes, the hole's in the back. Why? Because their natural and their most efficient mode of locomotion on the ground is knuckle walking. So it's like they're on all fours. And so if their head was structured like ours, they'd be looking at the ground all day and wouldn't be able to see where they're going. So God designed them to where their head is oriented this way according to their spine so that they can always walk like this without having to crane their neck up. And so what that means is their inner ear, their organ of balance, is oriented like this. Whereas in us, it's oriented like this, so that when we stand, we feel like we're naturally oriented when we're upright, not like apes. Anyway, Lucy had the ape inner ear, and the pelvis, the human-likeness of the pelvis was probably adjusted from reconstructing fragments, gluing them together according to what the paleontologist wanted to see. So there's a subjectivity involved in reconstructing these skeletal elements. Okay? And by the way, it had an ape-like big toe. So did you notice in the video, let's look at that video again. I wonder if I can, look at that foot. Okay? So that's what we call hands for feet. So Lucy had hands for feet, just like chimps. So that's the truth about Lucy. So some colleagues of ours put together an anatomically accurate, to the bones, model of a Lucy and put it on display in the museum in Kentucky there. And so here we go. All you do is cover it with hair, and it just looks like an extinct ape. And it was. In fact, you don't have to take my word for it because I'm biased, because I believe the Bible. Take the word of these folks who are biased against the Bible. What do they have to say about it? Lucy's kind would have walked bent hip, like we walk upright, erect. They walked bent hip. Bent knee, rather like a chimpanzee. That's Lucy walking, rather like a chimpanzee. Quite like a chimpanzee. So we're going to, let's knock it out. You don't have to get a Ph.D. in paleoanthropology to knock this off the tee. All you got to do is just read, you know. And so Solly Zuckerman, no friend of creation, says they are just apes. He was just as right back in 1987 as he would be today. And that brings us to the second example of the same category. Because if Lucy was a dead ape, then it's a dead animal. And guess what dead animals do to the creation account? Nothing. That means God created animals to reproduce according to kinds. This ape reproduced according to its ape kind. Maybe it's an extinct kind, maybe it's an extinct variety, but there's no Lucys today, and it was an animal, 100%. Nothing. So for every evolutionist who says Lucy was in our past, which Donald Johanson still says to this day, Lucy was in our past, he's got hundreds of colleagues who believe the same evolutionary story that he does, but they disagree because they want their missing link to gain fame, funding, fortune, and glory. And they have to debunk his missing link in order to support their own missing link so they can get funding, so they can put food on the table for their kids that night. Okay, so there's some of that. So Ida was a dead animal. Lucy, dead animal. So that's a couple of dead animals. No threat to Genesis creation whatsoever. In fact, supporting Genesis creation according to kinds. And it reminds me of, now we're starting to look at this, what I call the fake parade on the top. A friend of mine did a survey of 20-year-olds, roughly. Do you believe in evolution? Asked the survey. 99 roughly said yes, percent said yes. The next question on the survey, what convinced you of that? It was multiple choice. Was it dinosaurs, fossil record, natural selection, teaching on evolution, human evolution? Which one? 40+% picked human evolution more than any other single category. And it all comes from this picture, this fake parade. what we're actually finding in the real fossils does not bear this picture out. In other words, in the picture in the top, it shows monkeys to apes to humans. But in the real fossils, and so imagine this, the monkeys are supposed to be represented in the lowest rock layers, and then the transitional forms transitioning into, like the pre-humans, they're supposed to be in rock layers above the monkeys, and then modern-looking humans are supposed to be in the rock layers near the top, because it's supposed to show this evolution from lower to upper, from older to more recent. But the actual fossils keep popping up in the wrong place, so that there's human fossils down in the lower layers, I'm going to show you one in a minute, and then there's Lucy fossils in the uppermost layers, and they're all jumbled up. So I drew my little icon with a bunch of different animals and humans mixed together in all these different layers, which is how what the rocks actually reveal. Make any sense? Yeah. Okay. So we're gonna try to debunk a little bit of this myth. Now, when we get in conversations with our friends, and they say human evolution is true, it's scientific fact, evolution is proven by human evolution. I mean, Australopithecus. I mean, it's like they say the name, and just the name is supposed to be persuasive. So how do we react? Do we say, well, I went to a creationist seminar, and as soon as you say that, they just tuned you out, okay? So what you have to do is ask them what they believe and why they believe it. So when they say, science has proven human evolution, what question can we ask? What science? Great question. What evidence was it? Teach me, I want to learn. And in the process of them trying to teach you, they will end up teaching themselves like I did. There's not much science to this at all. It's just storytelling. But they have to come to that conclusion for themselves, so it's up to us to lead them by asking them good questions. Anyway, that was free. Free advice. We're taking another bunny trail that's for free. Look at these creepy eyeballs. Can you see this? I took this picture of a model of Lucy, very different from the model that we saw in the Kentucky Museum, full of hair, covered with hair. This Lucy has human eyes, human spine, you could say walking upright, human knees pointed forward, and then it even shows off camera, I've got other pictures that show perfectly human feet. And it looks like a transition, certainly does. But that's wrong. That's wrong anatomy. They should give it ape-like stance and what did they say? Bent hip, bent knee, rather like a chimpanzee with hands for feet. They don't show any of that stuff. And they should show that stiff spine, but instead they show this. So, but then they stick human eyes in it, and I want to ask why. And by the way, this has just become so persuasive. Okay, on the left, there's this artist who rebuilt a human based on a human fossil. And that's from Australia, but that's a person, okay? All he needs is a haircut and a suit, and he'll fit in downtown Dallas, okay? And then there's a gal there that he put human eyes into a human skull for this gal. I think her nose is rather extreme, okay? I've never met anyone with a nose like that. Why would they do that? So, but do eyeballs and noses fossilize? No. So the artist gets to choose what influences the artist when he makes these decisions. Now on the right, there's an actual gorilla. By the way, that's the scientific name for gorilla. Genus, species name, gorilla. That's fun. And then there, just next to the gorilla is a fossil reconstruction based on a fossil skull, where he put human eyes into an ape skull, just like the Lucy thing. So why are we doing that? And I say he because I found the artist who did this, and I found his quote where he admitted what is influencing him. Here's what he said. I wanted to get a human soul into this ape-like face to indicate evolution. He did not say, the data demanded that I put an ape-like face together with a human soul. No, he said, I wanted to show evolution. He's trying to illustrate this story that does not have evidence in the fossils, but it is really persuasive. And so we have generations of kids coming up watching, what are these ape-man movies? Planet of the Apes and all this garbage. And they're creepy looking, you know, and persuasive. And maybe we did evolve. And the surveys that we're taking show that these youngsters are more influenced by Hollywood than by their own parents and by science or common sense. So we got a lot of work to do, class, a lot of work to do. So this is just storytelling. By the way, uniquely human attribute is our eyes. We have the whites of our eyes are visible in people. But look at that gorilla. Very little whites of its eyes. So when a gorilla or a chimp or a dog or a baboon directs its attention at something, it turns its whole head in that direction. And so you could tell where it's looking. But with us people, I can have my head over here, but my attention is directed, here. But you can tell where I'm looking because you could see what? You could see the whites of my eyes. So we have a whole dimension of communication, interpersonal communication, that no animal has. And so, for example, we can go like this. Oh, this speaker is so boring. No animal does that. No animal can do that. They don't have the eye muscles, they don't have the eye controls, and they don't have the software in their brain to interpret what those motions mean. We do. We have all that. Uniquely human. That's part of what it means when he says human soul. So anyway, shame on him. Okay, let's go to our last one. Second to last one? Second to last one. Let's tee it up. Homo habilis, say it. Oh man, that sounds scary. Does that mean we evolved from something called Homo habilis? Well, maybe. Let's look at it and see what category it fits into. So I'm holding the famous skull replica, KNMER 1470, and it's supposed to be one of the original Homo habilis skulls. It looks like a tiny person. So this got more popularized in 1959 with Mary Leakey, and she found, and she published it in Nature in 1964, her ape skull fragments found mixed with human tools. Human tools. Now, how did she interpret this? You got a pit, a bunch of bones, bone fragments, some human tools in there too. Only people make these kinds of tools. So you got evidence of humans, and then there's ape. And she concluded what? The apes made these tools. So it was a smart ape, and she called it Homo habilis. She fitted into that category. Now, is there another way to interpret the same data? Okay, raise your hand if you've got an interpretation of the same data. Yes, sir, in the middle. Have you ever been that hungry? You raised your hand first. It's like, they ate the ape. Apes are delicious. I love apes. Yeah. Hope you don't have to do that often, but certainly that's a way to interpret the data, and it's consistent with the biblical framework, apes being apes, people being people, and people getting hungry. Okay? This is it. If we don't have Homo habilis, then we lose the central link between apes and humans. Homo habilis used to be it. In the 70s, it was it. But it ignores. Okay, so Homo habilis came from those layers here. Olduvai Gorge, Tanzania, same place. Olduvai Gorge was a fully human, modern-looking human skeleton, the whole skeleton. It was discovered in 1913, named OH1, Olduvai Hominid 1, and it's been there, and no one's talked about it since. Even modern paleoanthropologists, some of them don't even know about it. It's just sort of buried. That doesn't fit into our paradigm. Let's not even talk about it. But there, it's fully human, and here's an example of what I said I was going to show you. Not just monkeys down in the lower layers and moderns at the top. Now we've got a modern down in the bottom layer. And since the 70s, back in the 90s, and the double aughts and everything, we've found more of these hominids and Lucy types in layers above, in same layers as traditionally thought of as just being humans. Okay, so let's do this. Let's let the opposition tell us what they think about Homo habilis. Is that what I'm on, habilis? Robinson considers that the original Homo habilis was a conflation, not a real thing. It's just a conflation of Australopithecus, that's Lucy bits, and Homo erectus, which is human. So if you take ape parts, pretend like they belong with human parts, ta-da, you've got a missing link. And that's what they did. And so Homo habilis is too variable to be a sound species. This guy doesn't even use it, back in 87. So I have Frankenstein there. Why? Well, so the idea is, with Frankenstein, for you young folks who aren't fans of Mary Shelley yet, you stitch this body part together, and you get an arm from this guy and a head from that guy, and you get a brain from Igor, and you sew it all together and zap it with electricity, and suddenly it's alive. And so I get the same sense with Homo habilis. It's like you get an ape part here and a human part there, and you put it together, pretend they belong together, and you write stories about it, and suddenly it's alive. But it's only alive in our minds. The data are just ape bits and human bits. Well, that's separately created kinds all along. So we get to, let's knock it out. You don't have to take my word for it. I've got bias. Let's take the word for the people who are biased against the Bible. They say this: Homo habilis is an all-embracing wastebasket species into which a bunch of junk can be swept. Here's another quote. The transition from Lucy to human is thought of as momentous, but the fossil record bearing on this is virtually undocumented. There's no fossils documenting the transition from ape to human. Maybe it's because there was no such transition. I don't think there was. If there's no fossils to show it, then it didn't happen. Second category, therefore, is human parts mixed with animal parts. Animal plus human. Guess what that is? Not a missing link. It's not good science. It's not a reason to go back to my Bible with a pair of scissors and cut out the atom bits and undermine the rationale for the gospel. It's just storytelling about animal parts, extinct apes perhaps, and pretended like they belong with humans. Okay, last example, and we're getting down to our last category, and it's Neanderthal. And here I took a picture from the Time Life book that I read in the 1970s that helped persuade me when I was a kid that I evolved from apes. And there's Neanderthal, and he's just about to become a real person, but he's not quite there yet because, you know, he's got a beetle brow, and he drags a club, and he's just kind of brutish. So we get to, let's tee it up. So when I was a kid, I was taught the Neanderthal was becoming human, not quite there yet. So that's the story in Time Life book. Since then, we've learned a lot about Neanderthal, hundreds of examples of their burials across Europe, mostly, but also some in China and in the Middle East. Neanderthal genome, yeah, we take the bone, and we extract the DNA from the bone, and then scientists have been able to sequence the DNA and compare that sequence digitally with modern human DNA sequence. And it's a match. So they had human DNA, which is exactly what we had been saying for decades here at the Institute for Creation Research, where we looked at just the anatomy of these people. So they were people, we've been saying. They're people, they're people. They do intentional burials. Like no animal buries its buddies. Only we do that. And so when they found that the DNA was 97+% match to modern humans, we thought, well, that's what we would have expected, and that's what they found. So here's a picture I took of a model of a Neanderthal man on display at the Field Museum in Chicago. All right, and so I remember I was walking into this room. You know, you get different rooms, different displays, and there's this guy without a shirt and with a grass skirt, and he's behind a glass box, and he looks really real. And it just takes you aback, you know. You turn around the corner, and boom, there he is. And there's a little 10-year-old girl in front of me, same thing. And we're both going, boom, what is this? It's like, get some clothes on. It's cold here in Chicago. And so I looked at her, and she's got like some sort of notepad, and she's taken note. Must be done a school project or something. And so I looked at this guy, and I said, you know, if you gave him a shave and a haircut and put a suit on him, I bet no one would even notice him walking around the streets of Chicago, which is a huge melting pot, just gobs of people from all over the world. And she looked at me, some strange guy behind her, and then she looked back at the glass box guy, and then she looked at me, and she looked at her paper, and she goes, yeah, you're right. And so it's like, I thought, well, it's nice to be right every once in a while. So let's knock it out. Not an ancestor, just a totally human, totally fully human. They married with moderns. How do we know? Burial sites with Neanderthal people, modern-looking people, same burial. They cooked their food, evidence of fire pits. They made jewelry, they made instruments, they buried their dead intentionally. Their remains overlap humans, and they shared, 99%, 0.7, not 97, modern human DNA. Okay, so that's our first example of our third category and final category, human. Did you know that it's a dead human? Did you know that people die? Are you ready to die? You got to happen. It's going to happen to you too. For it is appointed unto man once to die, and after that face judgment. So we got to get ready for that day. But death brings us to the Lord. That's biblical. So because somebody died in the past, Neanderthal or otherwise, does that mean I have to go back to Genesis and chop out Adam with a pair of scissors and then go to 1 Corinthians and chop out Adam? You know, there's 15 books in the Bible that refer to Adam by name. Well, you chop those 15 books, and then the other books that remain referred to the books that you just chopped out, and guess what you end up without? You end up without the Bible. But there's no reason to doubt the Bible. Everything we've seen, all these fossils, it's either a dead animal or it's a mixture, it's like a mistake or a conflation, is what they said, of animals and humans, or it's a dead human. So guess what? That's biblical, and biblical. And so the Bible stands, Genesis got it right, and we can trust what God says. So here's our three categories. This is my conclusion. Here's examples of dead animals, Ida, Lucy. There's another one nicknamed Artie, came out in 2010. It's just another example. It's Ardipithecus ramidus. And so that's just an ape, extinct ape. Okay, animals died, big whoop. Okay, and then there's the mix of animal and human parts. Some of these are intentional frauds, and some are accidental mistakes. So Homo habilis is a mix-up. Most of the skeletal fragments assigned to the habilis species are human. Java man was supposed to be, the first. This is back in the 19-teens. Eugene Dubois, he ended up going to the island of Java and telling a big story about his find. And it ended up, after 30 years of having buried it below his house, he died, and then some other evolutionists got a hold of the famous Java man, which had made it into the textbooks, and found out that it was an orangutan jaw and a human skull cap. That was it. So mixing animal and human together, that's just a story, not a real thing. Piltdown was a hoax or a mistake. And then this whole idea of cavemen. You know what cavemen were? Men who lived in caves. And where would you go if you were trying to migrate from the Tower of Babel, from which you've been dispersed around the world, and you haven't yet had time to make a house, and it's really cold outside because it's the Ice Age, and you don't want to die? If I was you, I'd go into a cave. That's what they did. That's what our ancestors did. In fact, lived in caves until not that long ago. Fully human, Neanderthal, Homo erectus, fully human. And then I have their hobbit, which is the nickname given to Homo floresiensis, which is on the Flores Island in Indonesia. Really tiny people, these were, with diseases that come from inbreeding, we think. So anyway, even today, as Dr. Tompkins just showed us, there are really tiny people. For example, the actors who played the hobbits in the movies that have the hobbits in them. They're like 4'4", these people, but they're, just because they have such tiny skulls and tiny brains, that means their intelligence is lacking, right? You're supposed to say no. No, but you're giving me the stare. No, they're just as smart as big brain people. It's not the size of the brain, it's the wiring. So people are people and their brains are wired like people brains. Anyway, so we either have animals, a silly mixture of them, of animal and human, or humans, and these are all very creation-friendly categories. If you want to learn more about these fossils, the best book on the topic, and it goes through many more fossil examples than what I've been able to share with you today, is called Contested Bones. And so that's excellent. Dr. Galuza's book, Made in His Image, promotes and discusses evidence in our anatomy. So if you're interested in human anatomy, what makes us uniquely human, then this is a great book, a great resource for us. In fact, we made a ready-for-TV DVD series on Made in His Image. One episode talks about the human visual system, stunning, what all is required. One episode talks about babies and what it takes to give birth. It's just a stunning series of very precisely orchestrated events to make the next generation, and it happens every generation. And all glory goes to God for what he did in creation on that. Creation Basics and Beyond is, I think, every college student or every high school student thinking about going to college ought to have this as a resource, Creation Basics and Beyond. We have 2 chapters in this book that deal with today's topic of hominids or supposed ape men. But we have many other chapters in this book that deal with all kinds of other topics. For example, what about starlight from far, far away? What about the Ice Age? What about the gap theory of Genesis 1, chapter 1, verse 1? So we deal with those main creation questions, co-authored by our staff and faculty here at the Institute. And then, of course, we want you to sign up, if you haven't already, for our free magazine, Acts and Facts. Okay, 3 categories. Just watch the news, you'll see. They'll come out and say, oh, it's a missing link. And then just wait a year, and they'll come out and say, no, it wasn't a missing link after all. It actually fits into either this, that, or the other category. Happens every time. You'll see it happen again. Thanks, everybody.